After the Horus heresy, every legion was split into disparate and fractured warbands, each with their own identity. However, despite the broken legions, in each of these warbands a trace of that original legion still remained. Whether that was out of loyalty to a specific Primarch or as a shared cultural identity, there was usually some traceable element to these new warbands. Except for the legion that started it all, the 16th, the Sons of Horus. They're kind of carried on in Abaddon's Black Legion, but does that mean that the Sons of Horus are completely wiped off the face of the galaxy? Am I committing a crime and sin against James Workshop himself if I paint my Chaos Space Marines sea green? Well, no, and no. But what would a good Warhammer YouTube video be without copious amounts of over-explanation? So welcome to GoneHollowMinis. My name is Colt, and today we're tracking down the Sons of Horus in the 41st Millennium. Alright, to get us started, let's try to pin down the timeline of the Sons of Horus post-heresy. After the traitors were broken at Terra, the Emperor along with them, the remnants of the heretic forces were swiftly driven back out of Imperial space and into the Eye of Terror. This period is known as the Scouring or the Great Scouring, and we should be getting more info about it in the upcoming Black Library series. For the traitors, though, this resulted in a ton of fractured legions all being corralled in the territories of the Eye of Terror. On these worlds consumed by the Empyrean, the leftovers of the legions would try to consolidate what power they had left and figure out how to rebuild their failed rebellion. I'm sure there were plenty of spats between legions during this time frame, but this held breath of the era was eventually broken by none other than my personal favorite legion of petty assholes, the Emperor's Children. Eventually, the Third ran out of mortals that they had, collected during the Siege of Terra, and decided that all of the other legions probably had civilians that they weren't doing anything with, which meant that it was totally justified to take them by force. This, unsurprisingly, was not welcomed by the other legions. The conflict spread throughout the Eye of Terror, and soon most legions were at each other's throats. And then there was Fabius Bile, who decided that the galaxy needed another Horus and stole the War Master's body to try and clone him. This, unsurprisingly, was not welcomed by the Sons of Horus. That second happening is where we get to see the origin of Abaddon's ascendancy. To get their father's body back, he assumed control of the remnants of the 16th Legion, killing many of the remaining captains and ordering the transformation of the Sons of Horus into the Black Legion. More on them in a second. Upon recovering the War Master's body, Abaddon destroyed it, denying any chance of cloning or resurrecting the War Master, and also forcibly turning a new page for the Legion as a whole. This is the point where the Sons of Horus are effectively destroyed. Every Legion fractured, but the Sons of Horus was killed by one of their own, only to have something new and entirely different born in its place. In the Black Legion, the Sons of Horus both do and don't exist, and I know that's an oxymoron, but let me explain. Let's start with the Black Legion. As far as Warhammer's narrative and model range are concerned, these guys are the descendants of the Sons of Horus. If not by legion number, then at least by position in the overall balance of power. See, during the Legion Wars, a lot of the 16th's remaining captains bowed the knee to Abaddon, either out of respect for the line of succession or sheerly out of respect for his power. Those that didn't were either killed or chased into the warp. Those that followed the first captain painted their armor in mourning black, swore allegiance to the War Master and Chaos Undivided, and became the Black Legion, intentionally distancing themselves from the Sons of Horus. In fact, by the 41st Millennium, I'd wager that the actual Sons of Horus make up an incredibly small number of the Legion's overall strength, which is instead made up of recruits from other warbands and renegades. But the problem is, a lot of the Legion's trappings still remain. Abaddon takes Horus's title, he uses Horus's Talon, he uses Horus's ship. Hell, most of the iconography of the Black Legion is either directly reminiscent of the 16th Legion's iconography or is straight up called the Eye of Horus. Which is what I mean when I say that the Black Legion is and isn't a successor to the 16th's name. Despite how hard Abaddon tries to run from it, the legacy of the War Master still clings desperately to him. And if I can dust off my English degree for a second, I actually think that that vestige is incredibly important to the Black Legion's identity. The idea that even as Abaddon attempts to cut ties with the galaxy's past and cut a new, twisted path for humanity, he still can't completely escape the history that led him there. We are all built upon the decisions and choices of our forebears, and when your father came within spitting distance of toppling a galactic imperium and felling its deific ruler, a simple coat of black paint isn't going to sever you from that past. So, begrudgingly or not, the Black Legion are the closest remnants that we have to the Sons of Horus, at least as far as commonly discussed or tabletop supported factions go. They're kind of the safe route if you want your Chaos Space Marine army to embody the tenets of Horus's original rebellion. But what if you want an army that's more recognizably Sons of Horus? What if you like the sea green and barbarian iconography? Well, luckily there's precedent for that too. See, as Abaddon tried to wrest control of the 16th remnants, not everyone was down with the program. Many captains tried to fight and were killed, but a few managed to escape the War Master's wrath. These bands are few and far between, but we have enough to set a precedent. Most notable among them are the True Sons, a detachment of the Sons of Horus that can trace their organization back to the end engagements of the Horus heresy. There are also a handful of others mentioned, but we don't have too much info on them. That doesn't really matter too much for us though. For our purposes, their simple presence in the lore gives us all the ammo we need. Not every captain bent the knee to Abaddon. Part of this is because of the 16th Legion's structure. I've done an entire video about that if you're interested, but for now, suffice to say that the Sons of Horus typically maintain smaller, more tightly knit units, as opposed to the sweeping military formations of other legions. This, coupled with a good dose of Chthonian tribalism, I believe made the companies of the 16th more predisposed to turning insular in response to the changing galaxy, relying on their loyalty to their brothers when their loyalty to their Primarch failed. It's not a stretch to think that these impromptu brotherhoods may not be immediately ready to abandon their Chthonian tradition at the behest of a captain that just has a taller top knot than they do. Regardless, these warbands that denied the War Master are collectively known as the Thrice Cursed Traitors. That's not a warband in itself, as much as it is a collective term for the Sons of Horus that remained the Sons of Horus. Okay, so now that we understand our two main options for representing the Sons of Horus in 40k, why don't we go over a few basic homebrew lore questions to get us thinking about where our warband is coming from. Firstly, where did our warband come from? We have two main options here. There were detachments of the 16th throughout the galaxy, but by the end of the heresy there were two main fronts. Firstly, obviously, is the Siege of Terra. This is where the bulk of the Legion ended up. By this point in the heresy, chaos corruption had started taking hold. There were sorcerers, possessed, whole nine yards. These were the Marines that saw the death of their Primarch and their Legion's failure to kill the Emperor. But there was also the Chthonian front. Towards the end of the heresy, Captain Varen Asherodon and several others began to become worried about the apparent corruption within their Legion. Concerned about the Legion lashing themselves to the whims of gods and hoping to preserve the Legion's Chthonian roots, Asherodon led a detachment of the True Sons, Chthonian Sons of Horus, to try and liberate their homeworld. These Marines were all Chthonian bred, motivated by Chthonian pride as opposed to corrupted fanaticism. This didn't end well for them, as the planet was eventually cracked by the Dark Angels, but still, it's harder to fault their motivations. These True Sons of Chthonian are heavily implied to be the originators of the True Sons warband, giving us a place to build our lore around a warband that maybe escaped the worst of the Siege's End and the Scouring. Next, how might our warband react to chaos? Well, we have precedent for both sides of the chaos spectrum. Through individuals like Malagurst and the Quiet Order, we see Sons of Horus partaking in demonic rituals, and even possession. For instance, the Lupercalia, the Brothers of the Wolf, are basically Sons of Horus Gal Vorbak. Side note, I absolutely need to kitbash some Wolven Possessed. I think in the novels they just appear as regular possessed Marines, but come on, Chaos Corrupted Space Werewolves sounds freaking cool. But the point is, Chaos was definitely used by the 16th. I believe they stopped short of full-on Wordbearers-esque worship, but lots can happen in 10,000 years. Especially given the Chthonian influence. Chthonian is very inspired by pagan, Celtic, Gaulish, and other non-Roman cultures from the eras around the Roman Empire. While it may not be mentioned specifically, working in elements of chaos worship through regional deities feels realistic enough to me, particularly given the role of the warrior lodges and their assistance in the spread of chaos corruption. At the same time, of course, we also have evidence to the contrary. The Sons of Horus are incredibly proud, and many saw worshipping chaos as weakness. Again, we can look to Varen Asherodon and his True Sons. The perceived decline of their legion was another reason why they asked for leave to liberate Chthonian. If you want a chaosless warband that sticks closer to the legion's original ethos, they might be your best bet. Finally, let's talk Chaos Lords. Who's leading our warband? Well, we have some options here. As mentioned, the Sons of Horus prioritized smaller organizations of units, often omitting as much of the hierarchy of rank as possible. A safe bet for our Chaos Lord is a captain. This gives us an explanation as to why our Chaos Lord had a bunch of Sons of Horus to lead after the heresy. But we also have another option in the units of Reavers employed by the 16th. These are insular, almost familial squads of shock troops unique to the Sons of Horus. These were direct echoes of Chthonian gang practice, tribes of warriors bound by a brotherly loyalty to each other. Maybe our warband started out as a Reaver chieftain and his squad, then grew as they came upon more survivors from the 16th. These are just some questions that I found myself wrestling with as I was figuring out the lore for my warband. If you have any others, make sure to drop them in the comments and I'll do my best to chime in, and I'm sure a lot of the community has their own thoughts as well. But speaking of my approach to the Sons of Horus, why don't I give you a quick rundown on how I'm thinking of my own warband, to hopefully give you some ideas on how to work with yours. My warband is called the Blades of Lupercalia, both in reference to the city on Molech and the Roman festival. They're led by Captain Lycaia, keeping with the wolf theme, a former captain of the 16th and chieftain of his own Reaver warband. Lycaia and many of his men would find a new reverence for the Chaos Gods following the Battle of Molech, where the War Master truly ascended as an avatar of the Dark Gods. This would quickly blend with their dearly held Chthonian traditions, resulting in Lycaia's company worshipping the Chaos Gods euphemistically through the names of pagan Chthonian gods. Think of how Chaos is treated by many of the Dark Oath in Age of Sigmar, using traditional names for the Chaos Gods to offer praise while distracting from the fact that you're worshipping the epitome of disease or the literal blood god. They absolutely are still worshipping chaos, but it's done through the lens of traditional practice, adding a sense of culture instead of worship for the sake of power. Anyway, the soon-to-be warband would also go on to assist in the latter days of the Siege of Chthonian. After this goes poorly for the 16th, Lycaia would scrounge as many survivors as he could before joining in the escape to the Eye of Terror. Because many of these survivors would have been newly bred inductii, changes would need to be made to reconcile the group as a singular warband. The warband adopted a unique symbol that merged the Eye of Horus with the Chthonian serpent glyph, the symbol used by most Reavers. In addition, the warband painted their right arms black, in reference to the paint scheme of the inductii. These both were symbolic changes meant to unite the warband. No longer veterans and inductii, all were now united under the banner of the Blades of Lupercalia. Lycaia would split his remaining Reavers and their chieftains amongst his new warband, serving as sergeants and champions to advise the warbands through their newly changed galaxy. Now for the kitbashing and hobby side of things, you can probably see a few Sons of Horus specific bits. I actually think that the standard CSM bits would work as well, especially with the inspiration taken from Fantasy Chaos and stereotypical ancient pagan aesthetics. But I found these helmets too cool to pass up, and I wanted to take a stab at making a shield inspired by Horus Aximans, so here we are. I think it looks pretty cool, and the print actually turned out pretty well for something I made in Microsoft 3D Builder. Hey, it's not my fault that most of my other 3D modeling experience comes from Roblox Studio when I was a literal child. The paint recipe I used was also a little bit different. It's all the same paints, but I found that my 30K recipe got a bit too bright and a bit too pale on these Chaos models. I believe it's to do with the amount of surface area that the trim takes up. I think it's just a little bit too much. So I darkened the colors down quite a bit, working more Scarab Green into my middle layers instead of just my base coat. This results in a much darker, almost sand green appearance, as opposed to the slightly paler tone seen on my 30K Sons of Horus. I was, admittedly, kind of flying by the seat of my pants for this recipe though, so I'll need to refine it into an actual recipe before I can give it out to y'all in a coherent manner. Keep an eye out though, I've got a few other Chaos Sons of Horus projects that I want to try out, so you shouldn't have to wait too long. But, for now, I've gotten a handful of these legionaries finished up, so let's take a look at how they turned out. I don't know why I've been in a green era lately. Between my Slaves to Darkness, 100 Kingdoms, Sons of Horus, and now slightly spikier Sons of Horus, I've got green armies coming out of my ears. But I guess it makes sense that I would move on to a new color after my previous purple obsession. Like I said, I am really happy with how this shade of green came out. It's darker, maybe a little bit cleaner ironically, but I think it still definitely reads as Sons of Horus. Coming up with the homebrew for my own warband and making all the little extra pauldrons and bits was a ton of fun, and I can definitely see myself running with this project. So if you'd like to see more Chaos Sons in addition to the 30K army, drop me a comment to encourage my short attention span when it comes to army projects. I promise I'll get back to Krieg at some point soon. But most importantly, I hope this video gave you some ideas for your own thrice cursed traders. If it did, and you share any on any social media platforms, do be sure to tag me, I'd love to see them. If you have any other questions about the Sons of Horus, or any feedback for me in the channel, make sure to drop them in the comments. Leave a like while you're down there, subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a video, and until we meet again, friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.